So far away, Lucas. Favourite giant robot from fiction?
Voltron, just for how awesome it is, or maybe just the Megazord.
Megazord is the correct answer. I was going to say Megazord. Pacific Rim is a film in which Idris Elba commands giant building-sized robots to perform rocket elbow punches to alien bioweapons. In essence, it's fucking awesome. Scenes that were mostly realised using CGI because the movie didn't have the budget to make giant robots. They did, however, have the budget to make a giant robot fist, which they used to destroy a tiny building.
Oh man, like, the Jaegers are awesome, and it's just, like, a shame that we couldn't actually build just giant Jaegers.
Well, here's the thing though, Lucas, because according to experts on robotics, whilst the Jaegers seen in Pacific Rim are wildly inefficient, they are technically feasible as something that could be made. And in fact, the most unrealistic aspect of the Jaeger program is the fact that they could move them with helicopters. And according to one source, that scene is wildly unrealistic because you would need about 64,000 of those helicopters to move one Jaeger, and there's only about like 50,000 of those helicopters in existence, so yeah.
I kind of want to see that on screen though.
Yeah, just a billion, like a cloud of helicopters.
It'll just be like up, but the house is just a Jaeger instead.
And just a billion helicopters like lifting up into the air. Like, that's the most unrealistic aspect, according to experts. Like they say, like Jaegers theoretically could build them. It's just they'd be wildly inefficient. It'd be way more inefficient to build a giant gun. And there's probably someone out there saying you can't read too much into the logic of this movie where a giant robot fights a giant alien bioweapon, but the first one was directed by Guillermo del Toro, who's a turbo nerd in this regard. And according to the people responsible for the CGI, del Toro sat in on a lot of the CGI work and was insistent that it was as realistic as it could possibly be. By which I mean, he said that when you're constructing the Jaegers in CGI, I want you to only construct them out of virtual parts that could realistically be manufactured in our world. I don't want you to make them look unrealistic in that regard. Because really, if you make it with CGI, you can make it look however the fuck you want. But Guillermo del Toro's like, no, don't do that. They need to look realistic in the sense that they could be built by the people in the world that I'm creating. For example, like the paneling on Gypsy Danger. He was insistent that all those panels look like something that could be manufactured in our world. And then he's talked at length about like CGI is a great tool, but one of the things that a lot of directors miss is the imperfections that sell it as being real. And an example he singles out is like when Gypsy Danger gets dragged into like the upper atmosphere, you'll see that like a little bit of frost goes around the edge of the camera, as if it was a real camera filming a real robot that's really in the upper atmosphere, and that sells it. It's those imperfections that sell you on this being real.
And that's one of the worst parts about the sequel, which Del Toro didn't direct, I believe.
No, he didn't, no.
Is like all of the cameras are just like they're not there anymore. They're not in the scene. They're just floating entities. Whereas you actually feel like you are that person in the first movie watching that battle happen.
And that's almost entirely down to Del Toro's direction. And he insisted when you had stuff like just a robot walking down the street, like the camera's got to shake because the street would shake. And if we were filming this for real, the camera would be on that street. And as well, in that second movie, they just fucking destroy everything. And I hate that. I hate that they just willy-nilly destroy everything, because one of my favourite moments in the first Pacific Rim is not even a moment where they're fighting. It is when Gypsy Danger is just walking down the streets of Hong Kong and there's a bridge in its way. And in any other movie, Gypsy Danger would just fucking stroll straight through that bridge. But no, the robot takes the time to step over the bridge to keep the infrastructure in place, to protect the infrastructure. Yeah, he destroys the road, but not the bridge.
Choppers, do you have a visual? Over.
That's what the robots are there for. They're there to protect.
They're there to protect as much of the, like, you know, the necessary infrastructure as possible. And that, again, is Del Toro saying, well, these things are designed to protect the cities. Of course, the pilot would step over the bridge if they're able to, because that could be used in an emergency to save people after the fact. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they even put that shot in and that Del Toro considered it shows how much and how well he understood this idea and how much they fucked it up for the sequel. bringing it back to the first Pacific Rim movie and the giant robot fist they built, as you probably expect, almost every scene involving a Jaeger was realised using CGI. However, Guillermo del Toro still insisted upon creating several kind of ridiculous practical effects, including a life-size Conn pod for the actors.
Oh yeah, like all the ones where they're stomping around like inside of the suits, they're all like real, aren't they?
Yeah, that was a real practical effect. That was the size of like an entire house. And it was fucking massive, and all the behind-the-scenes footage of it is incredible because the actors look so tiny in it.
All sorts of things happened. You know, they were on a huge gimbal that went up in the air and shook people and kind of throttled them, and rain was coming down and sparks were flying down.
And it would look so stupid if it was like CGI instead of practical effects.
Yeah, and Guillermo del Toro like completely 100% understood that. And something we've talked about on the channel before is that CGI works when it is used in tandem or to enhance practical effects, because practical effects will always get you a better reaction from an actor because there's something tangible in their environment for them to act alongside or react to. And that's why all those... You can see, like, when you're watching, like, Charlie Hunnam, like, walk, he is fucking knackered. Every stomp takes effort, because, of course, he's in a giant fucking robot suit. He's actually in one. It's like, and it sells his performance.
Okay, Carl, it's finally time to talk about it, like this giant robot fist that we keep mentioning.
Yeah, so during the Hong Kong fight, there is a scene in which Gypsy Danger right hooks an entire building, and its fist smashes all the way through an office block and then comes to a dead stop just to the edge of a desk where it sets off a Newton's cradle. And believe it or not, folks at home, that is a real practical effect. Realised with a giant robot fist and a tiny miniature office that was painstakingly constructed by a studio for that one moment.
So who is it that was in charge of recreating a tiny, tiny office space?
Well, that was 3210 Studios, who took their job very seriously and put a heroic amount of effort into realising a scene that was about 5 seconds long. And remember, the set they constructed was almost immediately obliterated by a giant robot fist. And they've got like this great behind-the-scenes little like vignette showing how it was constructed, and they went to the effort of even making tiny bits of stationery to put inside cups to put on the tiny desks, and like printed off tiny photos of loved ones to put inside miniature photo frames and stuff like that.
What?
They did all that and then smashed it apart with a giant robot fist.
Like, you probably don't even see those on screen. It's just all getting completely destroyed.
Yeah, this is a scene that lasts a grand total of about 5 fucking seconds, and they went to the effort of putting knickknacks on the tiny desks that got immediately destroyed. And keep in mind as well that miniatures often don't react the same way as a life-size prop will, so 3210 Studios also had to account for that and create the miniatures in such a way where they would be realistically blown apart by the fist.
But that does make sense, because I suppose, like, if you punch, like, a small toy desk...
Yeah, it's not going to fly apart and splinter in the same way that an actual, real, full-size desk would. So they had to keep that in mind when making these miniatures, and that is fucking incredible. But again, for a 5-second scene, most people assume was CGI. They even had to make a tiny little Newton's cradle. A tiny little one.
Even the Newton's cradle was real?
The Newton's cradle was real as well.
Oh, man.
And I think that just shows like the level of care that went into making Pacific Rim. When you get the second one, it's like, fuck it. Fuck it. We can Voltron these robots now, who gives a fuck. And far away, Lucas, you mentioned something you wanted to talk about at the end of this video, yes?
Yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to mention like all the movies that have made good use of miniatures.
And miniatures are an underappreciated aspect of filmmaking, because if they're done well, you don't notice that they're there, much in the same way as like practical effects and CGI. People only notice practical effects and CGI when they're done poorly. And it's the same with miniatures. And the example that immediately springs to mind for me is Independence Day, which I believe
that's the one that first came to my mind.
Ah, okay. Well, go on, tell me about Independence Day then, because there's a fact about this that a lot of people know.
Well, I might not know the fact, but all that I know is that for Independence Day, it's the shot where they laser down the White House and explode it.
Yes.
Like, that was all done on a tiny little miniature set, and they had to get the camera down to street level and blow it all up from a miniature perspective, and it looks so cool when you see the behind the scenes footage of it.
Yeah, and I believe that movie still holds the record, or it did hold the record for most miniatures blown up in a movie. And the fact about that is that they wanted the fire to travel along. Do you know for that iconic shot of the city being obliterated, where the fire just... They couldn't figure out a way to realise that with the miniatures that they had. And the story goes that they spent ages figuring out how to make the fire do that. Because when you create an explosion, it naturally wants to go upwards. It doesn't often travel out in the way that they wanted. So the solution they had was to turn the entire set on its side vertically and blow it up that way and then film it from above.
Yeah, that was it,
That's how they did it. And speaking of not noticing these effects when they're done well, I think just a testament to that is the fact that almost every single shot of a jet in that movie is a mini jet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just a painstakingly constructed miniature that they made fly past the camera really quick. And your brain doesn't notice that because the miniature's of such high quality. And it's like with matte paintings and stuff as well.
Yeah.
So many matte paintings go unnoticed, and by design, because that's how good they are. And the best example of that is the end of Indiana Jones. You know, the iconic shot of the guy wheeling the crate through the warehouse full of 1 million different crates. That's not a stage, that's just a painting of a warehouse. And the actual set was just a path on which the guy pushes a dolly with a crate on it, and then they put glass in front of the camera, which had all of the warehouse painted onto it.
Oh,
and
man.
The painting was just of such high quality, your brain doesn't notice it, and you see it as being a real thing. And when it's explained to you, it makes perfect sense, because creating that set practically would have cost a fucking bomb. But it blows my mind every single time I see the behind the scenes footage of how they did it. And it's just a super realistic painting. It's great. And you never clock it. And it still holds up. But it's like The Thing. The film The Thing, when they first encounter the alien spaceship. And you see them all stood on the ridge and they look down to the... That's a painting. Just a super detailed painting done by a legend. And it's like with movie posters for modern films, where it's just the actors' faces just lazily photoshopped into an awkward setting, and they look terrible and they're not memorable. And then you go and look it up and go, oh, the guy who did the original Star Wars paintings, the original Star Wars posters, Drew Struzan, did all the Harry Potter ones, Indiana Jones, a bunch of other ones. He's still alive. He's still knocking about. He's still doing work. And movie studios could go and get into it, so they don't. And it baffles me why they don't. Just get him to do it, or get an artist to do an original piece of artwork for you. It's like in regards to thumbnails for videos. These videos just use a generic thumbnail that Brad or Nisha or Lucas throw together. Mm-hmm. But for my playthroughs on my personal channel, I endeavour, when it's a longer playthrough, to get an artist to do an original piece of artwork for me. And I'm always just amazed at just the quality of the artwork they produce. And then they'll say, oh yeah, 50 quid. I'm like, what? And then I get quoted I'll do some thumbnails, 20 quid, and they'll just Photoshop my face on. It's no, what? I could get an artist to do an original piece of super sick artwork for a 10 or more. Ridiculous.